Well, as I've mentioned in the last few episodes, we've been working on kind of a revamp of our content over the past few weeks on both YouTube as well as our podcast, which is a merging of what was previously two podcasts now into one. So whether you're a part of our Church Media HQ audience or Connection Culture, we're glad you're here today. We're finally making that transition official, and we're going to start by announcing the new name of the podcast. But if you've been with us from the beginning, the name is actually pretty familiar. So let's get started. My name is Luke Clayton, and welcome to the Must Increase podcast. Welcome to the Must Increase podcast, home of Church Media HQ and Connection Culture. As I mentioned, I'm your host, Luke Clayton, and I'm joined by my frequent co-host and esteemed colleague, Mr. Bo Snyder. Bo, thanks for being with us.
Good to be here, Luke.
Now, hey, before we dive into the new podcast, or the new-ish podcast, I suppose, I do have a little bit of a public service announcement. Before we do get started, I need to give a special note to anyone who may be listening on the Connection Culture podcast feed that you're going to want to make sure that you get connected to the official Must Increase podcast feed. If you're listening on what was formerly called Church Media HQ, you're in the right place, and you may have noticed that the artwork of the show is different. The title is there to reflect the new name. But if your feed still says Connection Culture, then you need to switch over to the actual podcast feed as soon as possible, because in the coming weeks, we're going to stop publishing new content to that Connection Culture feed. So just search Must Increase Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen, or just see the link in the show notes. It's probably the easiest way. Just click or tap that link, subscribe to the Must Increase podcast, which brings us back to Bo. Here we are. We are really kind of taking it back OG, if you will, on the podcast here. So we're changing the name, or changing the name back, I should say.
Yeah, because that's where it originally started, way back in 2016 or 17.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it's been a few years. I love how we always forget. We're like, how long have we been doing this?
I know.
But perhaps we should have looked that up, but we didn't. But anyways, yeah, so that's how we started doing the Must Increase podcast. And really, I mean, I remember you and I, we were working on some stuff in terms of, we were doing some video. We experimented with some YouTube content. We'd made a couple of short films, some things like that. And just one day out of the blue, I was just like, hey man, we should start a podcast. And you were like, okay, So
I was a little skeptical because it seemed at that point podcasts were still,
they were kind of on the rise.
Yeah, I was still kind of new to podcast, and it was one of those things where it's like, well, you got to be a really big, have a massive audience to have a podcast.
Yeah.
Like, nobody can do that. But I was like, well, no, actually anybody can do that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of but that was a while ago though.
Yeah. So when we went to start it, that was before Church Media HQ, the concept existed. I mean, everything was just Must Increase. When it all started, if you will, which the business, I suppose, started in, it's been almost over 6 years ago, 2016.
Really? Yeah, I guess so.
Must Increase, and we're going to kind of talk about the origination of the name here in the coming, this episode, or maybe the next episode, we'll talk about that a little bit. But it was like, hey, let's start a podcast. What should we call it? Well, obviously the most simple thing was the name of the company is Must Increase. Okay, the Must Increase podcast. And so that was the original name. Then there for a couple years we shifted to Church Media HQ, but now we are back to the Must Increase podcast. And because we're really, for the content of our weekly episodes, we're really headed in, I wouldn't say it's a completely new direction, but it's a little bit of a different. It's like I said earlier, it's a merging of Church Media HQ and Connection Culture.
Sure.
But essentially what we're going to be doing is very much kind of what we started Connection Culture to be, where we're looking to more than just looking at the marketing aspect of media, which is what Church Media HQ, it's like, how can a church use media to market themselves?
Yep.
We're more looking at, yes, we'll definitely be talking about some of that, but we're going to be looking into the more consumer, if you will, side of it and why it matters. Something that you and I have noticed, and anyone out there has noticed, is that this world that we live in, the culture, the society, is just, it's all consumed by media and technology. I mean, I think I made this statement to you earlier today off the mic. Like, it seems like everything is media. It really does.
No, yeah, it's true. I was actually looking at the notes earlier, and I don't even know how to say this, but I don't think there's ever been a time before that we are so saturated with consumerism, stuff, content, information. I mean, it's just kind of like, I mean, whether that's good or bad, I don't actually know, because sometimes a little too much is actually not good.
Yeah.
But everyone consumes in some way or another.
Yeah.
Obviously, some consume more than others, but everyone is a partaker in some way, I guess, or maybe a contributor. So it's just that world we live in, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we've touched on this before, but I think it's something that maybe in the future we should do a deeper dive on, is kind of talking about the history of media. Because when we hear media, the first thing we think about is digital media.
Right.
Which is the vast majority, I would say, of media content out there. So, anything online, video, social media, things like that. But the truth is media is the plural of the word medium.
Right.
Which basically just means anything that serves as a in-between, as a go-between, as a medium of getting information from a creator to a consumer.
It's just a fancy word for a channel.
Yeah,
that's all
exactly
it is. That's really all it is.
And
okay, like, example, when I read a book every morning. Like, I mean, not a book. I read a few pages from a book every morning. Initially, I don't think of that as consuming media. But it is, in a way. I mean, it's kind of an old school way, but
it's an old form of media.
It is technically a form of communication, a channel. So, but when most people think of it, I think they do think of the social, the news feeds, the movies, whatever. But media is everything from print to Twitter to everything. So it's a very big model.
It's like you were saying, it's a channel, it's an avenue, it's anything that can be used, like I was saying, to get information or to get content from a creator to a consumer.
And that's always changing.
Yes.
Those channels are always changing.
How that's been delivered over the years has varied. So you talk about a book. A book is actually a form of media. Yeah. It is a medium in which an author communicates their content to a consumer.
I mean, I would say we're getting in the weeds a little bit, but maybe, 40, 50 years ago, maybe newspapers was the number one medium of kind of
in terms of news and probably. Yeah.
Then I'd say maybe television probably took over in, the 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And then now here in the, probably 2000s, 2010s, we see the digital aspect, the internet becoming your main source. I mean, when's the last time, I can't think of the last time I heard of something for the first time from something that wasn't a digital online source, whether that be a podcast, a video, or a blog. I can't remember the last time it's like, I heard that the first time on the news, because you know what? I don't watch the news.
True.
And so,
and my life is better.
Yeah. Exactly.
We'll get to
that. So here's the thing. Media can be really toxic.
Sure.
And some are going to argue that the problem is media itself, but, the true problem is much deeper than that. And so, again, if we take a step back from the term media and broaden our perspective, it's not just about the media. It's not about the TV, the movies, the social networking, and so on. It's about something, again, much more meaningful and deeper, and that is actual connection. Because, again, what is media doing? It is connecting a creator with a consumer. Or it's connecting a friend with a friend.
Sure.
Like, for example, if I want to, hey, how did we schedule all this? Just texting you, calling you, whatever. Hey, man, let's meet up at this time. If you want to reach out to someone, a loved one, whatever, how are you going to connect with them? In many cases, you're going to use a form of media. If it's not face-to-face communication, you're using media. I mean, even if you were writing, like the old Civil War love letters, my dearest, those.
Gwendolyn.
Well, shout out to Jim Gaffigan there.
Yeah.
But seriously, that was a form of media.
Yeah.
And so media is all about connection, whether it's connecting people with people,
Right.
whether it's connecting people to some type of a story with maybe a movie or something like
sure.
that. Like I said, connecting the consumer connecting rather the creator to the consumer. That's what it's all about.
Yep.
It's all about connecting. So that was kind of the origination of the name connection culture, is we live in a culture that's based off of connection,
Right.
and media is how we're doing that. But we live in this society now that's overrun by toxic communication and negative messaging. And so what we want to do is we want to create positive content. We want to provide helpful insight so that you, your family, your church, your business, no matter who it is, can navigate the crazy media culture that we live in and enjoy that meaningful connection. That's something that's been missed. Is yes, we could talk about how bad quote unquote media is, but the truth is that I think there is some meaningful connection there, but we have allowed the toxic side of media to distract from that.
Well, it's like anything else, Luke. It's people have this problem with, classic example, Dave Ramsey always talks about, money. And we've said this before on this podcast. Money.
Not technically, because it's a new podcast now.
Yeah, I guess that is true.
This is all new.
This is
Everything's
the
new.
First time, yeah. This just in. Money is amoral. Okay. He talks about you can take money, do something good with it, or evil with it. You can take a brick. He says build a hospital with it, or you can throw it through a window.
Yep.
Same thing with media. When I think if you interviewed 10 people and say, hey, what comes to your mind when you hear the word media? Most people would probably have a negative connotation in some way, whether it's to the news or just, I'm tired of Facebook or Twitter, whatever the case. But here's the thing, though. The word media, poor media, doesn't have a chance because media doesn't mean a specific network, a specific person. It just means, like we said, just the channels.
Yeah.
So media can be used for so many good things. And we've talked about this a bunch of times, whether it's, holy cow. I mean, I guess you have parents that live close by. My family, how do I communicate with my family? Through these mediums of communication that is media, but they're not negative to me. They're helpful, they're useful. So sure. I feel like when you say the word media, it's not even you're starting at zero. You're kind of starting way down because everyone thinks of it negatively
exactly.
most of the time.
Yeah.
So to bring it to a level of like, hey, this can be good, it takes a lot of work because we'll get into this a little bit later. But I think you've even said this before, and I think it's even in the notes for later on, is 90% of what we consume is created by just a tiny bit of people.
Yep.
They control a huge... we're going to get to that later on, which is really great. But anyway, chasing a little rabbit there, but I think you get where I'm going.
Yeah, so again, media is there. It can be toxic, and sadly, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like that's what it gets a rap for, is just being bad, being negative, and because, it is, but here's what is, getting back to what is this podcast all about?
Yep.
The Must Increase podcast, and Must Increase in general, and everything we do, whether it's through ChurchMediaHQ or Creative Team Pro or any of the ways, the services that we offer, whatever. Our mission is this, is we want to partner with you, your family, your church, your organization to increase truth and inspire hope in the lives of others. That is our mission. Increasing truth, inspiring hope. Of course, there's a biblical basis on the name, and actually we're going to get to that in a future episode.
Yep.
But that is the problem we're trying to solve, is say, hey, media, sure, it can be toxic, it can be negative. You're not going to get rid of it.
Right.
So what can we do to navigate this culture of media, the society that's driven by it, by technology and media? What can we do to navigate that, to help us discover and lean into that authentic, meaningful connection in that way? So who is this podcast for? So that I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are asking. So again, if you've been on this particular podcast feed, which was formerly called ChurchMediaHQ, which, by the way, I should say, I don't know if I have this officially here, so maybe I'm jumping ahead of myself in the notes, but I do have to say, we've mentioned this before, but ChurchMediaHQ, as far as church-specific content, that is not going away. That is simply going to be redistributed through a different media, if you will, a different medium. We're going to be focusing more of our YouTube content on church-specific content. So, for example, about a month ago, produced a whole series of videos that are church specific. They're all on our YouTube channel. You're going to want to head over. So church leaders in particular, everybody, but you need to get subscribed to our YouTube channel. That's where you're going to get connected with that specific church content. But moving forward, church leaders, don't go anywhere, because we are going to be helping 3 different kind of groups of people, 3 different really types of leaders as we move forward. The first is the church leaders. So your pastors, your assistant pastors, volunteers, anybody that is helping in your church's media department, you're still going to value each of these episodes. Now, occasionally, like I said, we're going to have that YouTube content that's specific there to the YouTube channel, but we're also going to occasionally have some bonus episodes on this podcast feed that might be specifically tailored to churches. Like, for example, got a few episodes of conversations that we've recorded with church leaders, still going to put those on this podcast feed as bonus episodes as well. So that's still going to be there. Like I said, the YouTube content's going to be there. And church leaders are likely going to find our episodes. Here's my opinion. I think they're going to find them even more valuable now, because this content is going to be designed to help you help your church. So yes, we're still going to touch on the media side of things, obviously all media, but as far as the marketing side of media, we're still going to touch on that from time to time. But really what we're going to lean more into is, okay, for example, like we said, media, everybody in your church is using social media, for example. They're using smartphones. You, as a pastor, as a church leader, you need to be aware of how that works and how you can use that, or how you can teach your people and train your people to use media for good. And so, and look, here's the thing. We've talked about this. We've always tried to stay in our lane, if you will. But what we found is that that lane is pretty wide.
It is.
Because, like we're saying, media and connection, they really nowadays literally touch just every facet of life. And so, church leaders, you are going to still very much benefit from this content. So I do hope you'll hang around. Hope you'll stay with us. Now, business and other organization leaders, so ministries, nonprofits, and even actual for-profit businesses. So over the years, we've helped several non-church leaders, and I've actually had them reach out. Some of them reach out and express appreciation for what we're doing. Even they're listening to our content on our podcast and stuff. And the majority of what we cover in terms of church media and marketing can be applied to any organization, whether you're a church or, like I said, a for-profit business. For example, Bo, I think it was back last fall, we did a whole series of episodes on how to create a podcast. Now, a lot of the illustrations and examples we used were very specific to a church leader, but really anybody could take the crux of what we learned there and they would, or what we taught there rather, and they could set up a podcast from it.
No, it's so true. And we always go back to one of our favorite things is Business Made Simple by
Donald Miller.
Yeah,
StoryBrand.
And he is the king of short videos that he's kind of like, Craig Groeschel, just like short snippets of gold to where everything he says, comes from a marketing perspective or something about his business, but you could apply it to everything. So that's something that I really like about a lot of things that we talk about is like, hey, this could be for church, your business, your own personal social media page, whatever it is. So a lot of those things are so interchangeable. They just relate to everything.
Yeah, exactly. So. And again, so we are going to touch on that marketing stuff from time to time, but you mentioned Donald Miller. Excellent example. They've got, I think they've got a couple of podcasts now out there.
I think they do too.
They've got a marketing one, a business one. And so if you're looking for marketing stuff, go check that out. Like I said, we might touch on that, but again, we're like, there's so many people out there doing it and doing it well. We feel like we can lean a little bit more into just, again, how are you going to, on a personal level, use media? Because here's the thing, a key principle we always emphasize is that if you don't take control of your media will take control of you. This doesn't just apply to your business or organization as a whole, but this also applies to your individual, your focus, your effectiveness, your productivity, and really ultimately like your fulfillment in life, like purpose. I mean, I was hearing the other day how the average person, when at the end of their life, if you will, if we continue on the trend, the average person will have spent 7 to 10 years on social media.
Wow.
Now, I mean, think about 10 years. Okay, let's say you live to be 80 years old. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an eighth of your life that you spent.
Yeah.
On scrolling a screen on social media.
And I don't think it's going to get worse. I don't think it's going to get any better.
Yeah. So that's the thing. If you don't take control of that media, it's going to take control of you. So that's why we're there for church leaders. We're there for business and other organization leaders. But this is also for, of course, families, individuals, and leaders of families. So your parents, your grandparents, students, hey, if you're single out there, this is the content we're going to cover is relevant to you. So we've all got to acknowledge the impact of media on our life and on our families. It's like we said earlier, it's not going to go away. And how we respond to that is really crucial.
We can't. You need to just embrace it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. You can't resist it and reject it. Apart from like the apocalypse happening, this apocalyptic event that ends the world, which, according to Revelation, I suppose is going to happen at some point. But media is never going to be eradicated from our society. It's something that, we can't just wish it away. We can't pray it away. We certainly can't preach it away. It's a powerful weapon. And really, if we're honest, it's been very craftily wielded by many to influence and indoctrinate our society. And that's really been for the bad. And that's where the negative aspect of media is getting so predominant because, those that don't align with our values and our traditions, if you will, they are coming in and they're using media. They've learned to use it so very well to indoctrinate and to push, if you will, their ideology. And so for that reason, we also can't just be passive towards it. So as I said, that needs to be a response is that, I'm going to be just hesitant or resistant to it. That's not going to work. We can't be passive towards it either, though, because this is why most people are completely, again, consumed by their technology. We see families that sit around the dinner table and they stare at their phones the entire time they're there. How many times have you been that? You're out at dinner, and
all
everybody, it's like they move from the menu. They're ordering what they want.
Yep.
They tell them as soon as they hand that menu, boom. While they're waiting on their food, they're just on their phone the whole time.
I don't know how people
crazy.
Do it.
Yeah. So that is, again, though, that's just the mindless approach. That's the mindless and passive approach to media. It always leads to the media consuming and controlling way more of your time and your attention than you ever intended for that to happen. So we have to be intentional with our consumption habits. So no matter who you are, you will greatly value the content that we cover because the goal is to make you a more conscious consumer and motivate you to be a more creative contributor. So again, we're still going to touch on the marketing from time to time, but this is where I would actually argue that it's actually, even the times we touch on that is actually really valuable to just the average consumer, because a lot of what we do is we're kind of exposing you to the tricks and tactics that the advertiser are using on consumers to get you to over and spend, overindulge, feel dissatisfied, feel like you hate your life. We're going to expose a lot of that to you when we touch on that marketing stuff.
And let me tell you something. If people out there think that those things don't exist, you're very naive.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a, when everyone thinks of like a, like a salesman, they think of like the old classic used car salesman with all the tricks and all the right wording. It's kind of like a scheme type thing. Dude. And this is a very deep, dark pit you could go if you really want to, go down that. We're not going to do that today. But the amount of information that people have on you, people just how you use your phone, when you use it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this is what's kind of funny to me is just things like, I remember when we moved to our new house. This is a very small illustration, but I never put anything in my phone saying where I lived or whatever, and all of a sudden you go to hit maps and it says, "Oh, you want to go home?" It's like, how do you know where my house? But it's obviously because my phone knows where I am, and it's like, "Oh, you sleep in this spot. This must be your house." And just things like that. This has all happened to all of us, where you'll talk about some kind of product or something, and then you're scrolling Facebook. Why am I seeing an ad for something I was talking about last night?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a true thing, and there's just so much there that is pushed on us.
Yep.
If you think it's not real, it is.
Yep.
So for us to be aware of this, be intentional with it. That is what's important.
Yep.
I should have saved that for my final thoughts.
Yeah, you should have. That's right.
I wasted it. No.
Now you got to come with another one. But seriously, even when we talk about the marketing, you are going to value that no matter who you are. And I'm going to circle back here to church leaders again, talking about kind of our original audience, because you're still going to be a big part of our audience. Here's the truth about churches. The church, your church, is comprised of families. And healthy churches are in terms of how they operate, healthy churches are operated by healthy families, not just by the pastor and the paid staff and the leadership. They are run well, if you will, when healthy individuals and families are involved. So again, that's why pastors, if I'm you, I'm saying, hey, I'm going to let my church know about this podcast. I mean, seriously, obviously that's self-serving. Yes, we want to get, but in all seriousness, if I knew that there was somebody out there as a pastor, it's like, hey, there's somebody out there literally talking about the number one thing that controls their lives every day in terms of your phones, your screens, your media, I'd want them to know about that, because if you want a healthy church, you need healthy families. And so that kind of talks about who this is for. Let's talk about just in terms of content. What kind of content can you expect? And I'll run down this list pretty quickly. But the first thing is, we're going to talk about entertainment every once in a while. So we're talking about reviews, recommendations of movies, breakdowns of movies, TV shows, and other content like podcasts and maybe even books. Bo, you're a big reader. And who knows? Maybe from time to time we'll throw in some of that old school OG media and everything. So we'll talk about entertainment. We'll talk about technology in terms of phones, computers, apps, softwares, updates to consumer level tech. We're not going to talk like, as much as we might like to sometimes, we're not going to talk as much about maybe the nerdy parts of cameras and things like that, and we might from time to time just to satisfy, scratch your itch over there, Bo. But we will talk a lot about consumer technology, and then culture, how media content is being used to influence and shape our society. We've talked about before on Connection Culture, we've talked a lot about the metaverse. That is something we're keeping our eye on.
Yeah, that's true.
And then beyond that, just subliminal messaging. And now not so subliminal messaging that is showing up in movies and content that's being shown to our kids and things like that. We're going to call that out when we see it. We may also, I don't want to talk about this too much right now, but we may also have some original content beyond the podcast that we produce. Another reason we want to consolidate from 2 podcasts down the one, because we really want to focus our energy and intention to be able to produce a little bit more original content. Like we said, we've made some short films in the past. The good old pandemic kind of slowed that down.
Yes, it did.
We would love to do more of that, and maybe more of that. We'll talk more about the details of that later, but original content. Then we're going to be emphasizing, with that in mind, we're going to be emphasizing the importance of creation. So going to give ideas and insight on how you can be a meaningful creative contributor rather than just being that mindless constant consumer. And then my goal is to, as often as possible, give you some type of challenge, something that's going to push you to be more intentional about your consumption habits and push you maybe to be that creative contributor. And then also, a big part of what we're going to be doing here is questions and answers. Every week we're going to be answering your questions. And so if you want to text your questions, be sure to it's very simple. Just send a text to 615-900-4461. That's 615-900-4461. In the next episode, we're actually going to start answering questions. So send them our way to that number right there. Well, Bo, you already gave away your final thought. You got another final thought before we sign off here?
Yeah, I kind of gave that away. I didn't even really have that as my final thought. I think if I had just a kind of final sign-off thing is just that, okay, real quick example. Where I work, there's a lot of younger, when I say younger, 18 to 22, 23, whatever. And we as management have a horrible time getting these kids to put their phone down, put it away, put it in your locker, whatever. But here's the thing, though. We actually sat around, we had to have a conference meeting about this topic. This really happened.
Doesn't surprise me.
No. And this is what this is what we said. We realized that these kids have never, ever been without this. Mm-hmm. Because us that are a little bit older, we remember, when we got our first cell phone, when we got our first iPad.
We were young, but I can't remember a time when we didn't have it.
Exactly. So with these kids, even those that are, in their early 20s, it's part of their life.
Yeah.
They've never not had it.
Yep.
So we kind of had to have this thing where it's like, okay, we're going to tolerate it because that's what they know. Now, is it still getting in the way of some things? Yes. So this is my point. For anyone that thinks media is, once again, it's all negative, or it's just, I just kind of, turn my back to it, whatever. It is here to stay. It's the amount. Oh, actually, someone told me this the other day. They said, imagine if people interacted with people face to face as much as they do on their phones. Yeah. Imagine how exhausted you would be at the end of the day if you actually talked to people and interacted and gave as much energy into connection as you did. I want to meet this person. It's like, no, what about go meet somebody, whatever. Yeah. So my whole thing is take this, listen, see if there's something you can learn, something you can apply, because this is not just a small part of our life. It's a huge part. Yeah. Now, once again, we can control it into where it's not, this is all of our life, but we live in it sounds cheesy, but we live in a new age. We really do.
Yeah, we do.
It's part of our life. It's here to stay. It's only going to get bigger. So instead of just, shutting it out, learn to get on the wagon, I guess.
Yeah.
But in a way that is a good contributing part of this.
How about I tag on to that?
Sure.
How about instead of getting on the wagon, let's learn to drive the wagon.
Ooh,
I think that's it.
That's
yeah,
good.
There we go. That just came to me.
Nice.
That was an epiphany right there. But seriously, again, not just getting on. I think that is a big difference. We're either on it, we're trying to hop off it. But really what we need to do is we need to be trying to drive it.
That's good, man.
We'll talk more about that concept in general. That's why we're all about being a creator. And one more thing here, final thought to your final thought. You talk about this age, I believe it's the Gen Z that's been born with the phone in their hand, basically. But you say, why can't they just get over it? There's my old accent whenever I'm talking like the old generation. There it is. But, why can't they just get over it, whatever? Well, think about this. Just about everybody out there, I can't think of anybody, maybe someone who's very old would be an exception, but you were born in a world with motor vehicles. You were born in a world with cars. Now imagine that we said, hey, from now on, or for the next week even, you have to do everything in your life without a car. Now, there was a time when that was possible. And in theory, again, it is possible. Like, we could live that way. It would be very inconvenient, but we could, in theory, live that way. But it would be such a shakeup to our day-to-day. And I think all of us can relate about that now with screens and phones and technology. So I think that's a great final thought. I just wanted to tag it on there. Yeah. Bo, I always like to remind people, where can they connect with you? What do you do in terms of all of your media stuff? Like, how can we connect with you out there?
Yeah, I got my social media page and my Bo Snyder Video is my website.
BoSnyderVideo.com.
Yep. I still do. I do a lot of weddings. I do a lot of little promos. I do a lot of just I do podcast editing. I do some a lot of things. So yeah, they can find me there if they have any questions. I'm always, like you said, I can nerd out on things if people want to talk about that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's just me.
Yep.
Little plug there real quick.
At the time of recording, we're gearing up for the fall. I know we've already got some plans to be doing some video shoots. You've got some weddings books and things like that, but I'm sure you would take more. So yeah, BoSnyderVideo.com. Check out his site there, get connected. And remember to text your questions to 615-900-4461 because we very well may feature that in a future episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. Hey, why don't you do this? Share it with your friends. Like I said, pastors, take a moment, maybe share it with your church so that they can benefit from learning how to navigate the crazy tech and media culture. If you want to connect with us online, you can visit mustincrease.com and join us next time as we continue to increase truth and inspire hope in the lives of others right here on the Must Increase podcast.